In Commander, there are plenty of different archetypes and themes that you can build your deck around. There's treasures, there's aristocrats, there's sacrifice themes, there's Voltron themes, there's go wide. There are plenty of ways to play this game, and I love talking about them. Themes are great because oftentimes you can use plenty of different commanders with them. Some commanders work better than others, and other commanders work in really unique ways. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Deck Driver, and this is Arche-Techs. One strategy in Commander that I really enjoy playing is combat trick decks. Combat trick decks allow for a lot of creativity in the deck building process, the playing process, and your budget, allowing for just extreme flexibility in how you build the deck. This is great because it means that you can choose commanders at will, you can choose cards at will, and you can do it all within a reasonable budget. And let's talk about that. The average combat trick that you can find in Magic the Gathering goes for around 30 cents. They aren't usually very much more expensive than this, and in most cases you can't really get cheaper than 20 to 35 cents. A lot of these cards are common, so they're super easy to find, and you probably already have a ton of them in your chaff. This means that you can basically just buy in bulk from every single color combo plenty of combat tricks that you can already find. You can buy this kind of core of combat tricks and just have it ready to go in all 5 colors. It's really awesome to see. And with this core of plenty of combat tricks in all 5 colors, you can basically then choose any commander that you'd like across these 5 colors that can effectively use these combat tricks. Probably the best colors for these archetypes would be red, of course. Following that would probably be green, then white, then black, and blue. Although blue is probably the worst in terms of just raw stats that you can get, blue is also really good as it can give you unblockable, and it can usually give you card advantage through card draw. The only thing that's a little bit different with blue is that typically it goes onto enchantments rather than instants, but there are still plenty of combat trick instants that can be put on creatures. Black isn't super lacking in combat tricks. Usually they just have a negative drawback to them as well. White is often based around protection first and then buffing later. Green usually helps you get that trample that you want and sometimes can give you huge stat buffs. And then of course red has the cheapest and most effective options with the biggest buffs. I think the most expensive combat trick that we have to this day is Monstrous Rage, simply because of its 1 mana, 3/1, and trample. And the trample stays with the creature because of the roll token. Its price is also heavily affected by the fact that it's usable in standard right now, and it is used often in standard. It's a staple in mono red. But besides Monstrous Rage, every single card is very, very, very cheap to purchase. And since there are so many, it offers so much flexibility in both budget and what commander you can use. The next thing I love about combat trick decks is the fact that it can be used in Voltron strategies. It can be used in strategies where you're focused on combat damage, or it can even be used in control strategies. Maybe you have a green fight deck and you'd want to buff your creatures up so that you can fight the creatures around you better. Or maybe you have a defender deck and you want the defender to be able to attack back when it's blocking. Or you have something like Legolas. Sometimes control strategies can be really good for combat trick decks. Just the flexibility around the combat trick decks is really nice. I personally like to use it in a very simple and straightforward way. I typically have my commander be one of, if not the only creature that is really used effectively in the deck. And I usually try to make sure that that creature has an effective payoff for the combat trick. Because of this, you also want to run more protection if you only are using your commander. So you might want to actually draw back a little bit on how many combat tricks you use and how much protection you use. Again, the key word for combat tricks is flexibility. A variety of strategies can work with cards like this. When you have such a cheap and effective core that gives you raw combat stats, it works amazingly in both casual pods and even higher power pods. It then also helps with how much money you want to spend on the deck itself and what commander you can use. So let's talk about those commanders. I have 4 commanders that I really like to use when it comes to combat tricks. All of them are in red because red is a really fun color for me. And all of them have either some sort of payoff or really good synergy with combat tricks. The 4 decks are Zada, Hedron Grinder, Feather, the Redeemed, Xyrus, the Writhing Storm, and Obika, Splitter of Seconds. 3 of these decks you can get for less than $100, and the only one that's more than this is Obika, and that's mostly because of the Monarch cards and the other valuable upkeep cards that sometimes cost quite a bit. Each of them have very simple and effective gameplay, and a lot of them can typically give you tons of value in the earlier stages. Let's first talk about Zada. Zada is of course mono red, so it is the fastest strategy you could have, but it also potentially is the riskiest strategy you can have. Because of Zada's ability, all of your creatures will get the exact same buff. If you combine this with a cantrip effect, you'll be drawing a ton of cards, as well as dealing a ton of damage with a super wide board. In the first couple of turns, you're trying to get as wide as possible. Then by turn 4, you're trying to cast Zada, and on turn 5, you're swinging out for a ton of damage. Typically, you'd want to target the player that's either in the lead or is the biggest threat to you and try to take them out in that one turn. You might say that is unfeasible, but with a board state of maybe 6 or 7 creatures and all of them getting +5, +3, and trample, it's pretty easy to get there. Now, of course, though, Zada is extremely vulnerable. Because you're just in red, it's harder to find protection for Zada, as well as the fact that once you've killed one player, you are now the biggest target. A board wipe can easily set you behind much further. You're going to have to hope that you can untap once more so that you can kill the other 2 players. But after a couple games of Zada, most people will try to target Zada as best as possible. So it might actually be more effective to go even slower with the strategy and wait till you can use the combat tricks as soon as Zada comes out. Again, there's flexibility in gameplay and there's a lot of skill variance. But the deck is extremely effective and extremely fast. So some really good pilots will be able to use this effectively. The next one I want to talk about is Feather the Redeemed. Now, Feather is honestly pretty boring strategy, but also extremely effective and extremely cheap. I would definitely recommend this deck to newer players as its simplicity in gameplay is quite amazing. You have white, which can protect Feather often, every single turn, and you have red that can buff Feather the Redeemed. You're playing this deck to try to win through combat damage and commander damage. Now, this is pretty simple because a lot of your combat tricks are just going to go straight back into your hand. Feather allows you to use these spells over and over and over again. So by the time you're on turn 5 or 6, you're casting 3 or 4 combat tricks, you're turning Feather into a 10/10, and it has hexproof, and then you do that the next turn. So although it can get pretty boring playing the same spells over and over and over again, it's an extremely effective strategy that is great for newer players. It offers a lot of skill expression as to when to use your spells and when not to, and it's also a pretty effective strategy. We run plenty of removal since the fact that we don't have very many other creatures that can block for us, and make sure you try to use your combat tricks on turns that are not yours so that you can protect Feather and block whenever Feather is untapped. Next, we'll talk about Obika, Splitter of Seconds. Obika is a super fun strategy in the fact that you can use a lot of cards that don't see very much gameplay, and a lot of cards that do see a lot of gameplay, but are balanced at the fact that you only get 1 upkeep per turn. This could be any of the court cards for the Monarch, as well as just some super interesting cards like Twilight Prophet. Suspend cards are actually pretty cool too. And then you can try to just end the game with something like the Palace Siege, Subversion, or Indulgent Tormentor. Having plenty of ways to get multiple upkeeps after swinging with Obika is really cool. You can get to the point where you're having 7 or 8 upkeeps after your combat step. This can result in getting a ton of damage, a ton of +1/+1 counters, a ton of card draw, any of these amazing effects that we love to play. Since Obika has Menace on her own, it's pretty awesome. You don't need to run as many unblockable cards, but we still have quite a bit of them in there since we are in blue. We also run plenty of removal again because we don't have as many blockers as we normally would. And then of course, we're just trying to get combat damage in as effective as possible and as much damage in as possible. For strategies like Obika, you're not actually worried about the commander damage that you're doing to players. Of course, you would want to target the player that's most ahead to hopefully get them through commander damage, but you have so much value from your upkeep cards that is what's going to be winning you the game, rather than actually destroying all the players individually with commander damage. The last deck that we'll go over is probably my favorite deck of all of these, and that is Xyrus the Writhing Storm. Xyrus is an incredibly fun commander to play. While also being a huge target, Xyrus offers so much flexibility in the gameplay. Your goal is to attack people as much as possible with as much damage as possible. This lets you and that other person draw cards. This almost incentivizes the other players to allow you to attack them because they also get to draw 12 cards when you deal 12 damage to them. That sounds like a really good deal, and oftentimes it is a good deal. The only thing is that you get better payoffs from drawing those 12 cards. You get 12 snakes, you get more combat tricks to draw even more cards, you get ways and payoffs to deal plenty of damage to your opponents either through your snakes entering the battlefield or you casting spells, and you look for a couple overrun effects because you're making so many snakes. We're in the best 3 colors for combat tricks, where we can run removal, interaction, unblockable, and then have green and red for the best combat trick colors. We have built-in evasion with flying, and most of our red cards allow Xyrus to have trample. Because of just the perfection that is Xyrus and how effective he uses these combat tricks, I love this deck. And this is actually the deck that I have in paper for combat tricks. He truly is a blast to play. So, combat trick decks. The 3 biggest takeaways I think you can get from this video is the fact that they are very budget friendly. They can be used in a variety of strategies with a variety of commanders, and they offer not only simple gameplay, but also very effective gameplay when used in the right hands, and are on a very cool skill curve. The better you are at playing them, the more effective they get. I love combat trick decks, and I love Magic the Gathering. Thank you guys for watching.